planet, really. His name is Dr. David Wurmser, one of our top people in our Victory Coalition, which is focused on countering the Sharia supremacist threat, but it is also manifesting itself as another arm of the Chinese conspiracy, notably with respect to Iran. David has served in senior positions across the United States government as a naval intelligence officer, as an advisor to an Undersecretary of State and National Security Advisor and Vice President of the United States. He is these days the director of the Mideast program at the Center for Security Policy, and we're delighted to have him with us live as well. And David, we're looking forward to your thoughts on China and Iran and how this part of the Crinks conspiracy is shaping up to be also a very serious problem. Jeff has touched on some aspects of it, particularly in our own hemisphere, but talk to us about the Middle East as well, if you would.
Sure. I mean, those who deal with the Middle East tend to look at the Middle East only through the lens of the Middle East, and they tend not to, in recent times, I mean, this wasn't the case 50 years ago, but in recent times tend to look at it very narrowly because of that, and they miss the larger strategic plays at work inside the Middle East. Now, building on everything Jeff said, because it really, ultimately, it's anchored to what Jeff said. The Chinese have a very geographic-based strategy. They have a series of nations that are trying to extend the Belt and Road into the Middle East. We see it with Iran, Syria, Turkey, and then you have in North Africa the Chinese Belt and Road extensions into Africa with the collapse of Soviet or Russian position in North Africa because of the weakness of Russia and the collapse of Syria, which was the logistical hub for Russia. The Chinese have a much greater role now throughout sub-Saharan Africa that is pushing northward all the way to the littoral. So you have this large extension here, and against it, you obviously have another bloc that's trying to compete with it, the Israelis, the Saudis, the UAE, although the UAE and Saudis are hedging a bit because they're not confident. So if you put that all into context, there is a standard or more traditional strategic view of the importance of the Middle East. It is a battleground. It's a battleground that has tremendous American interests involved, obviously. And it's a battleground that we have limited assets. And so we've discussed this before in various different programs that Frank's put together, and including different editions of this program, about how really we need to strategically establish ourselves in the region in terms of freedom of navigation, shut down Yemen or the Houthis in Yemen, to anchor ourselves to the power that Israel has displayed so that we don't have to use that much power. And then ride Israeli victories against critical allies of Russia, of China's, like Iran, and so forth. But I want to focus on one last thing that actually is a big inversion of the situation, which is China's strategy. I think Gordon Chang has it right when he says China seeks to win a war by winning before there's a war. And its strategy is anchored to the idea of displaying such overwhelming power that it sends the signal that, we remember from our own movies, resistance is futile. And you might as well give in now. There's no point fighting a war if you know you're going to lose anyway. So just give in. And that creates a momentum, a tremendous momentum that feeds itself. It feeds itself in terms of confidence, production, economics, everything. And so China is essentially using what we used to call correlation of forces, an overwhelming superiority of force against the West to turn the tide of global momentum toward their red star and have the American eagle decline. And that feeds itself. And they hope that they can win these wars without even having to fight them as a consequence, or get what they need to further weaken their their adversaries, Taiwan and Japan and so forth, to further weaken them without a fight. But it all's dependent on this perception that China is massive and unbeatable. Now, how do you respond? You have some, Steve Bannon would argue that you need to start cutting China off from our technologies and so on and so forth. And I think that's important. I think it's a critical element, but alone it won't do it. What you really need to do is change the correlation of forces. Now, that means, of course, America has to seriously now mobilize for war, which the American people are still very loath to do. I'm talking about World War II type industrial mobilization to stand down China and take their defense buildup and challenge it and bury it, hopefully, at the end. But this takes time. It takes will. The will isn't fully there, and there's no program yet to build America up that way. So that's leading, again, to the same place, this idea that it's not that hopeful. So therefore, China sort of wins. We have to sort of give in and let them rewrite rules of the game, which then feed this and go further. But the Middle East offers something else that I think is an earthquake that changes all that. When Israel struck Hezbollah with the Operation Grim Reaper, and then afterwards struck Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, it was impressive. A lot of people thought, wow, that was good intelligence work. It was quite capable. But I don't think that it was fully understood what just happened in that moment. Because Israel also, the day or two before the Beeper operation, paralyzed Hezbollah's missile structure. There should have been 1,000 to 2,000 missiles shot at Israel in the weeks before the Beeper operation, and they weren't. And they weren't because they never managed to get the missiles out of their preparatory places, and there was no command and control to govern them, and Israel preempted. And then came the Beepers, and then came... So essentially, Israel, one would say, reinvented how war is fought, and they took out Hezbollah without a fight. The nation or the entity that was assumed to have almost 1/3 missiles, anywhere from 250,000 to 500,000 missiles, would do damage to Israeli cities, kill hundreds or thousands of Israelis, suddenly couldn't get off a shot and was catastrophically defeated. You could say, okay, well, the Israelis have been focused on Hezbollah for a decade or two. What else? Well, what Israel did is it literally cut and paste what it did with Hezbollah, and they applied it to Iran. Now, Iran is more serious. Iran is a nation that is 10 times as large as Israel in population, 35 times as large as Israel in terms of geography, and quite far away. And it's sophisticated. It had very advanced Russian equipment, Chinese equipment, and so forth. And the Iranians are fairly capable people. So Israel was facing a very dangerous circumstance. And it struck. And what it did was it took what it did with Hezbollah, it cut and pasted, and it did it with Iran. And we don't fully understand the parameters of what Israel did, but it was an entirely new structure of warfare, entirely new way of approaching warfare. And the truth was Iran couldn't even get a shot off for the first hours. And it was essentially paralyzed throughout the whole war. And it shot missiles, and the missiles, some hit, and there were 25 Israelis killed. Or 28 Israelis killed. But at the end of the day, Israel took down the entire structure of a nation much larger, much more powerful than itself, and paralyzed it and won, and had them literally prostrate at their mercy. There was nothing Iran could do. They were completely vulnerable to whatever Israel chose to do at that point, including full freedom of skies. Now, is that transferable elsewhere? Yes. Yemen, we just saw it happen in Yemen with the Houthis. The Israelis did the same thing again. Now, this is really important because China must look at this, and it must tell itself, if Israel has a cut and paste new form of warfare that, quite frankly, annuls order of battle, and that's the key point, annuls order of battle, the entire calculation of China in this massive defense buildup is a big question mark is put on top of it. If Israel can teach the United States how to do this form of warfare which my understanding is the discussions are already underway. If Israel can teach the United States how to do this form of warfare, it introduces into Chinese defense planning and their whole strategic image of being in control of the momentum, being overwhelmingly powerful. It takes that and it introduces variables into that calculation that raise a question mark, both in Beijing and anybody who then feels they should align with Beijing. So I would argue that for the first time, we may see coming out of the Middle East, not just a strategic play in the Middle East, but that in some ways, Israel now has assumed a central role in the Chinese Western the CCP Western competition, in that it has found a way of warfare that should, in the very least, raise very serious questions about China and its overwhelming force if the West both embraces that and incorporates it into its defense planning. And just the fear of that, or the instability of that, or the insecurity that Beijing would have in its strategy would give then time for the United States to mobilize, which is one of the key problems, is if we start mobilizing today, China will see it and they're ahead. And they may preempt. This could give us a window of opportunity. So anyway, I throw that.
That was brilliant and very, very important. And I'm so glad you're here with us live, because it'll be very important to have a give and take with Jeff Nyquist, who's also, of course, still with us, I'm pleased to say. We do have one final presentation by videotape. One of our